Welcome back to Community Conversations here in the Concord TV studio. We are just about through July, getting into August, and there was an issue that has come up in the state of New Hampshire, and it's not a recent problem, but recently the state of New Hampshire had put out a press release about how there were an increase in roadway fatalities, and here in Concord we were impacted by a couple of deaths of really valued community members. Tom Baran from AAA Northern New England is the man. He is the expert who knows everything that we need to know about roadway safety. And so I saw this as a great opportunity for us to talk about some of the statistics, to talk about some of the techniques. And so Tom, thanks for joining us in the studio. I think this is really going to be helpful, not just for Concord. We're going to share this out statewide as well.
Career law enforcement, did 38 years as a law enforcement officer and moved up through the ranks, but spent a lot of years on the road. I handled a lot of traffic fatalities, serious crashes where people were injured very seriously. So got to see that, in a bad way. And so what I did was, early in my police career, I did traffic education as well. And there's more to just handing out a ticket. There's also, the education part. So taught defensive driving in the state of Maine at the time, and taught a lot of people about how to be safe drivers. So that led me up to, after doing that many years in law enforcement, trying to do something else that wasn't so stressful in some ways.
Right. Yeah.
And so joined AAA and have been with AAA. I'm a traffic safety education specialist. I talk to groups and at conferences about how people can be safer drivers and what we can do to minimize our risk in driving. And so through that, here in New Hampshire, we work with the New Hampshire Department of Highway Safety and actually have a grant with them where I go around to different communities along with a law enforcement officer, and we talk to different groups. It can be new Americans, it can be teenagers, senior drivers, all of that, where we talk about how we can be safe drivers and to explain the laws a lot better, maybe in detail, and where people can ask us questions, because sometimes things are confusing. Roundabouts, for example, are a new thing that people are finding, difficult, although they're a good tool in our roadways because it keeps traffic moving and so forth. But a lot of people find those a little difficult. So we can field those questions in person. And it's a great thing for also law enforcement where the community can ask particular questions about intersections that they see are a problem. So the Cobb Grant, Community Outreach and Betterment is what it means. Great program. But AAA is also very active in legislation with highway safety laws and
Right.
slow down, move over law. Prime example. We've been an advocate for that and help move that through to become a law.
And a lot of people don't realize, myself included, didn't realize that there's a lot of AAA does research on traffic and does a lot more than just the towing services and the things that everyone knows AAA for. What are some of those things that you, before we started recording, you had mentioned about research and traffic studies and things like that?
Right. So AAA has the National Safety Foundation located in Florida, does a lot of research with basically car technology of today, what's workable and what's not, what needs to be adjusted. So they take cars that have the technology and they actually do some demonstrations with them and find out what works best and what needs to be corrected for safety features. Backing, for example, would be one of those things. Backing cameras and the alerts. How quickly do they happen? So we've done a lot of research with that, but also with teen drivers,
Right.
for example. Did a study where there was teen drivers that had cameras in their car for a year, and it watched their driving habits. And with that, we were able to see some pretty scary things. And so we'll probably take a look at some of those later on. But just a lot of research about, what happens, and how we can be better and safer drivers out there.
I have to ask, Tom, what about the self-driving cars? Cars that supposedly you can be completely hands-free, supposedly, and it seems like there's a lot of questions still about, how that works and what that means for everyone else on the road too. Does AAA have research, or has AAA taken a stance on that issue?
So the research is ongoing, but a driver is a driver, and you're the person behind the wheel that is operating the vehicle, and that's that's a safe way. Is when we have people that are paying attention, not impaired, and doing the right stuff is what we like to see.
Yeah, that's a great way of putting it. Now, if we could kind of start off, Tom, if you want us to kind of get started with sort of the problem that I had sort of briefly mentioned in my intro, sort of the scope of the problem, and I believe we have a slide that goes with that about, how did we get here to this particular issue?
Yeah, so New Hampshire is, one of many states. A lot of states are seeing this increase in fatality crashes. And just recently, as we can see here, there were 10 deaths in New Hampshire in just 4 days. That's a lot. That is a lot. They can be preventable. Yeah. And that's the other thing. When I was driving here today, the road programmable signs that are up flashing today, it says 73 people have been killed on New Hampshire roadways so far this year. One is too many, and that is exactly correct. The tragedy that's involved with the loss of life is significant.
And it's unexpected.
It is unexpected. It's tragic. And believe me, I have been the officer that has knocked on the door to tell family that a loved one wasn't coming home. And that today even sets with me, because it's traumatic for that family, and there's and it's bad news. So when we look at what's happening out there, we also saw that New Hampshire State Police did a speed detail just last week. They got a motorcycle at 130 miles per hour.
Yeah, I heard about that.
And then they had issued 50 summonses during that speed detail. 25 of those summonses were for drivers going over 90 miles per hour. Pretty significant. So we're seeing some very aggressive driving, and that's a serious problem, that the aggressiveness of drivers has increased considerably, and the amounts of speeds we're seeing out there has really increased.
I'm sure each case is different, but what's the motive of the aggression? People who are late, people who are just impatient? Are we ever able, through interviews after the fact or through police reports, kind of gathering of what's the source of this impatience or aggression?
Yeah, so you hit on just a lot of those. Yeah. People are impatient, and we see it on the roadways, and I just saw it the other day. A car was in the wrong lane. It needed to move over, and so it did move over, and it was a tight little fit. The driver that was behind that car was not happy. And the driver that was trying to change lanes wasn't familiar probably with the area. But the second car, they weren't happy. They gave a hand gesture, that type of thing, but there was no need for it. Because haven't we all been in a situation where, oh, here's my turn and whatever. And sometimes you have to say, to yourself, if you're the following vehicle, all right, yep, I can see you're lost, move in.
Yep.
Why is it so that person took it that way, right, that you cut in front of me? And it wasn't really a cut in front where the person had to slam on the brakes. But we become an impatient society in some ways, and there's almost like this bubble around our cars that how dare you come up against my car or close to it. If we're in the grocery store and you got a grocery cart and somebody comes close to you, there's the verbal, oh, sorry, yeah, no problem.
Right, you're right, there's a difference there.
But when we're in our cars, it becomes possessive.
Right.
And that's where some of the differences take place. But yeah, with the speeds involved, it's just becoming more maybe entitlement, where they feel, I can do this.
Yep.
And so, but there are consequences, as we saw with the New Hampshire State Police's speed detail, where they got quite a few speeders and so forth. And that's And the other consequences is what we're seeing for high numbers out there.
Yep.
So when we look at the United States, and there's a slide on this one with what's happening throughout the United States, we're seeing that increase. I mean, we're upwards to, in last year, I think it was last year, 42,915 people. It's one of the highest numbers we've seen in the United States in a long time. I mean, this is one of the highest. But if we go all the way back down to earlier years, 2018, we see that it's 32,000. That's an increase of 10,000 people that have died on our roadways. And we should be going downwards instead of upwards. Our vehicles have safety mechanisms in them. They have seat belts. They have airbags.
Your side mirrors, a lot of newer cars, where it lights up where someone's in your blind spot, right? Like
that's correct.
Because it's supposed to mitigate risk, right?
Absolutely. All these safety features. But you know what it comes down to? It comes down to the driver. The driver is the one that is responsible for the driving.
Sure. Yeah.
All the technology out there, it's good.
Still the person behind the wheel.
It's the person behind the wheel, and we'll talk about that.
So let's look at the New Hampshire statistics as well, which shows paints a similar picture, and that the rate that we're at this year, if I understand the numbers correctly, that we're at a rate to surpass last year to have, which is not the kind of pace that you want to be setting in this case.
That's correct. So right now it looks like it's a 14% increase over last year. Yeah. So I think it was 64 people that died last year. We're up to 73 today. So we're seeing that increase. If that keeps going, the numbers will surpass last year. And that is the wrong direction. And again, the numbers, they fluctuate a little bit, but I mean, you can see the year that there was 100 fatalities, and now, we're upwards to, 140 plus. That's a lot of people that have died on our roadways. And again, preventable.
Right. I would think the numbers would be going down, like you said. But let's get into talking about reducing risk and what drivers can do. So we've talked about the problem, we've established it, but there's a lot of information you have for us today about, what can drivers, even drivers who think they are good drivers. So that's for me, that's for our tech crew in the back, that's for anyone watching, that, what can we do to reduce risk? So I think there's an acronym that we have here as well.
That's right. So we want to read the road, and R stands for, the right speed for right now. E is for our eyes up and ready, and then A is to anticipate, and then D is for the donut, being the surrounding. And let's just go back to the R, the right speed for right now. What is the road conditions? Is it rainy? Is it slippery out? Is there a lot of people and pedestrians on the side of the road? That should gauge our speed. The speed limit may be 40, but you may not be able to do that. And we'll talk about speed as we go on further. The E is the eyes up. Eyes up and brain on, meaning we got to pay attention to our driving. They need to be up and looking at the road and not looking down at different things in our vehicle. And then A, we need to anticipate what's going on. When I look down the road and I see brake lights coming on like a quarter mile down the road, I'm anticipating there's something going on. I see a lot of brake lights coming on, so I'm ready. I'm slowing up as well. And then the D, the donut, that's the space that's around us, and including the most important is allowing enough space for the vehicle in front of us. So when we are out driving, it's read the road and ready for us to go.
Yeah, the eyes up. Just last week as a pedestrian, I was in a crosswalk downtown Concord, and there was a car approaching the crosswalk that actually was accelerating, not slowing down. So we get through the crosswalk, and sure enough, they didn't even acknowledge anyone waving at them or trying to get their attention. Eyes were just down.
Yes.
Not sure if it was phone, or GPS, or they're trying to figure, but not one in that several hundred feet, even when they went past and kept going, were their eyes up, which I think is just really terrifying that someone could be operating a car doing that. But it's common, I guess, right?
Well, we're seeing it. That's where the distraction is coming in, and that's a big issue in our driving world right today, is distracted drivers.
Right.
Yep.
So we have the acronym. That's very helpful. So I think we have information about sort of before you go, and I'm curious about. It's a great question about like before you leave, being prepared when you leave, so you're not wondering about did I bring everything with me for this trip I'm going on, or even if it's a short drive. But what are some of the things that we need to remember, Tom, about when we're leaving our house?
So getting ready to do a safe drive begins before really even getting in your car.
Sure.
So you need to make sure when you approach your car that, first of all, there's nothing leaking. If you see something running out other than the air-conditioned coolant water, but other than that, you're making sure your car is in good condition. Tires are one of the things that probably get neglected by drivers quite often.
So do a quick walk around the full vehicle.
We should, yes, absolutely. And for another reason is, when we're in our driveway, is there something in the back of our vehicle on the driveway, like a dog, like a child's toy, or even a child? Children play in driveways. And so if we just automatically hop in our cars
Without even looking,
that can be a problem. So we want to look at our tires. If your tires are bald or wearing not appropriately or not enough air, you're going to have a problem driving. You're going to have a problem stopping. Hydroplaning could be an issue with bald tires. So we want to look at that. We want to check our fluids, making sure everything's topped off, and actually have a mechanic that looks at our car on occasion so that we know it's good, because we don't want to be broken down on the side of the road, because that also is dangerous. So making sure that we have all those things in place, that we've looked at the safety of our car, walked around, looked at the tires, looked at our fluids, windshield wipers, are they good? Because that's going to be another thing that's important. If you've got streaky windshield wipers, visibility is hard. So we want to do that. So then, then we can get in the car.
Right.
But then it also means before we put that car, in drive or reverse, there are things that we need to do. And number one is we need to put our safety belt on. That is so very important. Safety belts save lives. They do. And I've seen it in my career.
Yep.
You're far better off having a safety belt on than not. If you're thrown from your vehicle, greater chance of dying. So we want to make sure that safety belt's on, and then our headrest is all set as well. So we're seated in the car, got the headrest, and the headrest should be, the middle of the headrest should be about the top of your ear. So when you hit that, you can feel it, but it should be just maybe 2 to 4 inches from the back of your head. So when we're stopping somebody, quickly, and or somebody hit us from the back, we're going to have good neck protection. So we want to do that as well.
That seems important to me too, especially if you are sharing a vehicle in, a family, and that, because I my girlfriend borrows my car or something like that, and then, that initial, something feels weird. It feels your distance between, the gas and the brake are different because the seat's been adjusted, or the recline is different, the mirrors are different. You don't want to notice that when you're in the middle of your drive, right?
Exactly. So the point about all this is we don't want to be doing this while we're driving, because that is a distraction.
Yeah.
But what you say is exactly what I hear from people. And I had somebody in one of my classes raise their hand and said, I don't like to readjust everything because it's set for my husband. Well, then you're not using all of that for your best safety, because it's set for him and not you. So we do. So mirror adjustment, and I do have a slide on this. Mirror adjustment is so very important, because we have blind zones in every car. So we want to make sure we're getting the maximum out of our mirrors. Make sure your overhead mirror is good and lined up, but your side mirrors. So on this diagram right here, you can see that the driver is moved over a little bit, so that they're looking at that mirror. And they're going to adjust it out until they start to lose the side of the car. And when you get to that point, you stop, because you should see just the side of it as you're moved over. And then what you're going to do for the other side is you're going to move over to the other part of the car in the center and move that mirror out just to the point where you're going to start to lose the side of your car, and you stop. What it does is it maximizes those areas that you can see better and minimizes those blind spots, which I think there's another slide that shows, what is left, for being a blind spot, and that would be the blue zone. It minimizes it greatly. So we should adjust those mirrors every time we go for a ride, because, if you're out on the interstate, and sometimes it's happened, you go to turn and you look and you don't see anybody, but all of a sudden you get the beep beep, and it's like, ooh, sorry, I didn't see you.
Yep.
But now with these adjustments, there's still a little bit of blind spots there, but it decreases it greatly.
Yeah,
so that's a
right.
really
I didn't realize, have way less of your car, that's actually further out to have the side mirrors than I thought.
Right.
Yeah.
So the comfort zone for a lot of people is you're behind the wheel and you can still see the side of your car. But what it's not doing is it hasn't broadened that mirror out so that you're seeing those cars on the side. And remember, we always, when we're changing lanes, use our mirrors. We always want to take a look over our shoulder. Very important. And when we're making a turn on a right turn, we always want to look over that way, because there could be a bicyclist on that side of the road coming up alongside
that you
of
then
us.
just cut off and
Exactly, or even have a collision with. So very, very important. So mirror adjustment, so very important. Our GPSs, do it before you're on the road. Don't be trying to go on the road and do your GPS. That's a distraction. The radio. And then, our lights are also a great thing, our headlights. Some are automatic. In older cars, they're not. Make sure your lights are on. It's greater visibility for cars seeing you, and that's a helpful thing.
So for the headlights, what's like the best way? So you start your car, you make sure you think your headlights are on, you get out of the car, you go around the front and make sure the headlights are on?
You can, or in most of your new cars now, there is a setting that you have to turn it, and it's automatic. It senses darkness.
Yeah, mine's automatic, but
Yes.
if I actually had to verify, sometimes it's hard to tell, or you think it's on, but it might just be the running lights on or something. Yeah.
That's a great thing. So we also need to, when we do an inspection of our vehicle, maybe once a month as well, have somebody help us. Turn the lights on, turn your directionals
brake
on,
lights.
turn your brake lights on, all of those, because those are so important to let drivers know. It's the communication part of our directional signals. It lets people know what we're doing. And so if they're not working, people don't know that we're turning, potentially, because there's a directional signal that's not working. And then lastly, I do want to point out that when we're driving and we're getting, in the car, just got in the car, our hand position should be at 9 and 3 or 8 and 4. Yeah. The old way that a lot of people were taught, and especially our senior drivers, was at the 10 and 2 position. And we don't want the 10 and 2 position on our hands on the steering wheel as if it was a clock, because if the airbag goes off, it's coming back into your hands are going to come back into your face. At 9 and 3, airbag goes off, boom, my hands go off to the side. At 8 and 4, they drop down. At 10 and 2, your hands are going to come right back. That airbag comes out at 200 miles per hour, very quick, and then it deflates. That's a lot of force, though, and it's going to drag your hands right into your face.
It's funny because when I took driver's ed at this point quite a while ago, they taught 8 and 4, but I forgot why it was that way. I just remember them saying we have this new hand position. This was probably 2007 or 8 or something. And they said this is the new hand positioning. So at that point, it must have been relatively new at that point.
Yeah, well, with the airbags that have come out and are in the vehicles now, that is the case. That's why. And really, the 9 and 3 or 8 and 4 gives you better turning radius. And so when you do the 10 and 2, you can see how tight that is. And the 8 and 4 is a lot better too. Long driving distances, the 8 and 4 is nice because your hands are down a little lower.
Your arms won't get as tight.
Exactly. And then the 9 and 3, it gives you a better turning radius also.
Sounds like an example of just common sense prevailing, I think.
It does. Yep.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So one of the other big factors that we haven't really gotten into yet is managing speed, managing your space between vehicles, proper following distance. I think there's some common sense with this, but people may not realize how much space you actually need. And I think we have slides that show that as well. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so one of the things that happens a lot is people's following distances. If somebody is too close, or if you're following somebody too close, and they stop abruptly, and it could be for a bouncing ball that comes out into the road, if you don't stop in time because there's not enough distance and you crash into them, it's your fault. So we want to allow the 3 to 4 second rule, basically, is what we want. So the blue car is passing a white sign there. And as that passes the sign, you go 1001, 1002, 1003, and 1004 or thereabouts. You should be passing the sign. And you use that as a gauge. You don't need to keep saying that all the time you're driving down the road, but you use it as a gauge to establish that safe distance. Because again, we see, and there is a lot of car crashes out there where people are following too close. And it happens a lot at yield signs where somebody looks like they're gonna pull out and then another car thinks you've already pulled out and they move ahead.
And they might be looking down the road to merge and they didn't see. Yep.
Exactly. So we want to have that safe distance between vehicles always. A little bit of a pet peeve for me, and maybe when you're driving, I hate to see somebody right behind me so close, because I know how dangerous that is. If I have to stop, and especially even on your interstates, you know, I think we've all come to a point where all of a sudden traffic is coming to an abrupt stop or it's really slowing down quick. If the driver behind me is not paying attention and then they don't react quick enough, they'll crash into the back of a vehicle. So we want to allow that, 3 to 4 second rule while we're following a vehicle.
So we also, scanning ahead and being able to look, not just looking straight down at the road seems important too, right? That you're actively seeing what's happening ahead of you, constantly scanning hundreds of feet ahead, I would think, right?
Yeah, absolutely. We want to be scanning 20 to 30 seconds down the road, because say I use the example of brake lights coming on down the road. I know something's at issue, so I'm reducing my speed. But another thing would be is if there's a car I see coming out of a side street, do they see me? Because it looks like they're coming out pretty quick. So I'm scanning ahead, and what I do is I take my foot off the gas and I hover it over the brake. And by doing that, I'm ready to get on the brakes. And so when we see something and when we anticipate and manage our speed and our scanning ahead, we want to make sure that we're ready to react. And that's the best part about, say, being focused on our attention. So put that foot off the gas and get it ready to go on the brake. If the situation doesn't warrant it, then you go right back on the your gas pedal and away you go, but you're being prepared.
Yeah, so, and proactively thinking about what could happen.
Exactly.
Just being ready.
That's exactly. And so driving requires our full attention. And this is, again, we need to really not be thinking about, oh, I've got to go to the grocery store and I've got to buy some milk. That's not thinking about our driving. I'm thinking about, oh, there's a red light coming up here. Yep, I see that. Oh, there's a pedestrian, a bicyclist over there on the side of the road wanting to cross. That's what we should be thinking while we're driving. Not having conversations a lot of times with our passengers, and sometimes that can get into a lot of details and you're not thinking about your driving.
Right.
It's a distraction.
Yep,
so,
absolutely. So speed is another thing that we've alluded to, and that I'm sure is a huge cause of many of the crashes and incidents that we've seen over the years is speed related. What are some things we need to factor in other than just the obvious slow down, but there's more to it?
Right, there is. So, first of all, our speed has to be reasonable and prudent according to the law, which is very important because even though a speed limit says 45, the road conditions may not be prudent for us to do 45. So that means, and it could be for a lot of reasons. One, visibility. Could be snowing, even heavy rain, could be fog. Our traction would be the other thing, is that, is it slippery out there? Even pooling water is a problem.
Right.
And then also, what is the space? How much is it congested area? A lot of pedestrians and people? Is it narrowed roads? All of that come into play with our speed. Most importantly though, the speed limit is the speed limit. But we have to adjust our speed according to what the situation is. And it a lot of times doesn't allow us really to do the speed limit because we need to make sure we're doing the careful thing.
Right.
And some people, that's where, it doesn't happen. All of these things, it could be slippery. How many times have you been on the roadway, on the interstate, snowing to beat the band, and somebody passes you? And it's like, they're going way too fast.
Right.
So we see that. So people are not sometimes being cautious and prudent with their speed, and that's where we see crashes and so forth happen.
Right. I mean, I can think of, there's so many examples, and I know there's a lot of other questions I have for you, but I can think of just in a lot of outside of Concord, there's a lot of 45-mile-per-hour roads that still have houses, but they're not dense residential, but you'll get things like yard sales, things that have vehicles on the side of the road
Right.
that all of a sudden impact your shoulders. Mm-hmm. And so I see a lot of people just in driving some of these, back roads, but they're still 45 or 50 in some cases, where you have to slow down because there's more pedestrians than you'd think there would be on one of these roads. Mountain Road is an infamous one on the east side of Concord where you'll get cars parked on the side of the road, which really, really impacts your visibility, and you shouldn't be going 10 over, like a lot of people do in that environment.
Absolutely. Yeah. So what raises the question too, though, is the faster we go, the longer it takes us to stop.
Sure.
So our speed zones and our school zones, they're set lower. And the reason they're set lower is if I'm doing 25, I clearly can stop quicker than I could at 40. And that's a big difference. They're say if you're going through an area where there's a lot of issues, you need to reduce your speed, because if you have to stop quick, your reduced speed hopefully will help you and prevent you from hitting somebody or something.
Yeah. Is there anything else related to speed that you would recommend for our audience?
Well, we need to definitely make sure that we're following the speed zones and watching for it. I find it helpful, and I use it on a regular basis too, because I travel in a lot of different areas, but I use a GPS. And not a lot of times do I have to use it because I don't know where I'm going, but it is helpful for a number of reasons. One, it also reminds me of when I see it, it reminds me of the speed zone that I'm in. It also will tell me if there's construction on the road ahead. It will tell me if somebody's broken down on the side of the road. And then there's this new system for police and emergency and fire called the HAS alert, HAAS, that also a lot of these apps will come up on, because the fire apparatus or police cars have that technology, and it alerts you that they're there.
HAAS?
HAS alert.
Okay.
Yeah, the HAS alert system. So I use the GPS, so that I can monitor my own speed as well, even though, I'm looking for the speed signs. Sometimes you come into a new area and you're unfamiliar, and so that is a help for me that I use, actually.
There are definitely spots where there are speed drops that I'm sure they make sense in the way that the road was designed, but they can catch a driver off guard that the speed drop might be around a turn and it drops from 45 to 30 or something, and you can miss it.
Actually, this morning coming here, it went from a 45 to a 30 zone. I came across Route 4, and it alerted me prior to coming into a roundabout, I think in Lee, that the speed limit was going to be dropping. And it was in advance of the speed limit dropping, which was a great tool, and it came up as a voice.
Oh, that's awesome.
So it was really, and so I had a lot of time to adjust my speed, slow down, although I did see the car behind me coming right along. But for me, very helpful in that regards in speed management.
Yeah, a lot of the drivers on Route 4 drive like that. So I know from having commuted from out that way before, that's a lot of the drivers, that's how they are, unfortunately. I wanted to ask you about just general, being prepared, being fit to drive in terms of your mental state. Obviously, the elephant in the room is about impaired driving, distracted driving. So I just threw a lot of those at you, but take that where you want to.
So all of those are real key points, in our driving today, because let's take distracted driving, for example. 10 people a day in the United States are killed by a distracted driver. That's a lot of people. And then that doesn't even account for those injured. It's hundreds of injured through distracted driving. So when we look at distracted driving, obviously, again, our attention has to be focused on driving. And so there's a couple of things that, we can do about it. And I have a survey here, I think, about the distracted driving and what that encompasses and so forth. And it shows you that, people are, when that ding goes off on your phone, how quickly do people want to look at it? Our brains kind of have been conditioned to, our phone goes off and I hear that ding. Do I want to look at it? And as drivers, and not surprisingly, this survey that AAA did found that a lot of drivers will instantly look at
how quick to respond.
Exactly. So when we look at this survey, 1 out of 2 people responded within 5 minutes. 23 out of this 100 that were surveyed, they did it right away. Right. And then you can see, the rest of the stats were, pretty bad actually, that we've been accustomed to responding to something so quickly when we didn't have that before because we didn't have cell phones.
Right.
And so this has become a really major part of distraction in today's driving world. It's not the only thing, but it's, and I think as our driving out there, we probably see it on a daily basis where somebody's got their phone. Even though it's against the law to hold your phone in your hand, you see it occasionally where people are doing. It takes 4 to 6 seconds to actually text. And in that time distance, that's traveling the distance of a football field while you're driving and not looking at your driving. That's a lot of time. That's a lot of distance. And that's where you see people, as they're trying to do that, they go into the other lane. They drift either off the road or into the other lane. When they cross the center line and hit another car, that head-on collision, the force of 50 miles per hour and 50 miles per hour, for example, coming together, the force is extensive. Those head-on collisions like that are usually very, very bad collisions and crashes. And so we want to make sure we do that. I also want to point out there is things that we can do so that we don't get those dings on our phone. So I have another slide that shows how we can set our phone to focus. And so if we have our phone on focus, the car motion lets our phone know that we're driving, and it automatically will go into that focus mode if we set it. If we set it. But 85% of the people know about this. When AAA did a survey, 85% know about this, but only, I was trying to think, it's only like, 54% actually use it.
They're like, we know about this, but it's not for me. I don't need this. Not me. I don't.
Exactly.
I'm responsible. I don't need
Exactly.
This. Yeah.
So, hopefully the viewers will see this. They can pick up their phone. And look at that. Look how you can put your phone on focus so that it's not a distraction. And you actually can leave a message. You can pre-do your own message. So if somebody does send you a text or somebody does call, the message will come up on their screen. Hey, driving right now, can't talk, we'll call when I get there. And that's a great thing. So I would encourage people to utilize that, such a safety feature.
Say what we will about technology sometimes, but that actually is something that has the right, where technology can be helpful to try to counteract some of the harm that's been caused. So,
absolutely. The tendency to hear, when you hear the ding or the phone ring, the tendency is to look for it. The other thing we suggest, obviously, is just to put the phone away so it's not accessible.
Right,
And then, put it on silent if that's what you have to do.
I have to ask you, what are your thoughts with, vehicles that have the actual touch screen? First off, what's the legality of, if you have your Sirius XM control panel and it's here and you're switching stations, you're still looking down. What's both the legality and also the common sense when it comes to those, where it's not a phone screen, but it's still off the road?
So it is a distraction. And so that's why, at the very first of this, we talked about set up your car before you go. Have it set up. AAA doesn't even recommend using the hands-free mechanisms on your car. Because when you're driving and you can hit the button on your steering wheel, right? So you're talking, and what are you really doing? Are you focusing on driving, or are you focusing on your talk?
Your conversation. Yeah.
Exactly, and it's a distraction. So we recommend, again, the phone on focus and just drive and pay attention.
Humans are bad at multitasking. No matter if we think we're good at multitasking, you can only focus on one thing at a time.
Exactly. The brain only allows us to focus on one thing at a time. We can switch back and forth, but we only can do one thing at a time.
Right.
The other thing I want to talk about real quick is that when we look down at our phone, and AAA has a safety commercial about this, the driver looks down at the phone and then looks up, and there's kids crossing in the crosswalk before the car. There's a 27-second fog, we call it, that the brain is in after looking at that and then looking up. The reaction time is what they consider is 27 seconds for the brain to readjust to what you're seeing in front of you. And in this case, the driver almost hits these children after looking down at his phone. So there's a delay when we look at our phone or look at something in the car and do something and then look up. They determine that it's 27 seconds.
That's crazy. Yeah. I wouldn't have thought of it that way. Now, impairments is kind of the other side of this as well, where you may not have a device, but your brain is not in the right mindset to be behind a motor vehicle.
Yeah, so, out of all the fatalities, like in the United States, a third of those fatalities are impaired drivers that have killed other people or themselves or whatever, but a third of that, figure, so that 40,000 some odd people that were killed, a third of that number comes from people who are impaired, either intoxicated by alcohol or drugs and so forth. So that is definitely, if we're going to be in a vehicle, we need to be 100% okay and not impaired. And there's a commercial out there is if you feel buzzed, you are buzzed, and it's by the National Highway Safety Traffic Administration. And that's exactly. So if you're going out, you need to have a designated driver. If somebody's going to be drinking, there should be some kind of coordination between people. Get an Uber, get a taxi, that type of thing. But we definitely can see, with the impairment, it affects our judgment, it affects our reaction time, and it just affects, our vital functions in being able to drive. Very, very significant. So definitely, I think, there's a slide on the alcohol impairment, and, it shows when we're perceiving something, and then we decide what we want to do, it's delayed.
Your processing
significantly delayed. And then the time you react could be too late. So judgment, decision making, our muscle control, and then our vital functions are all affected by alcohol. The other thing that's prevalent more today is drugs, and so we're seeing a lot more with marijuana use, especially now. And so that definitely has a big effect as well. And here, you can see that in this slide that, the odds of crashing under the influence of marijuana, it goes up 100% because it affects a lot of different things as well with our driving. And then when you add alcohol and marijuana together, it doubles the effect. And so pretty significant. And I've been behind vehicles where no question, the driver is smoking. I can see the smoke come out of the car. You can smell it, pretty distinctive smell.
Right.
That driver is under the influence, right then and there. They're driving and smoking marijuana, and it's against the law. And it's impairment. We want to save lives, and people are, we've got to be more conscientious of, hey, I want to have a good time with maybe going to a get-together. But I gotta have a plan. How am I getting home? Homeowners, if you're hosting a party, that type of thing, you gotta have a plan. How do people get home? And don't serve liquor all the way up until the end of the night. Add some food, make sure, people have ways home. That's so very important.
Yep, and we definitely have the taxis, Uber, ways to get home, leave your vehicle, behind and pick it up the next day.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah.
There is a lot of resources for people to use and need to use. I asked people, I said, if you have a prescribed medication that a doctor has given you and you've taken too much and it affects your driving, can you be arrested for that? And yes, you can. It's an impairment. And so, when we take our drugs that the doctor has given people, you've got to read the warning labels on it.
Right.
You got to ask questions. I actually had a lady in one of the presentations that I did. She said, my doctor had given me some medication and I took it in the mornings, and she says, I couldn't drive. I couldn't drive until later in the afternoon because it made me feel funny. Yeah. And she said, I went to my doctor, and thank goodness she did, and she got a prescription changed, and the whole thing is a lot better. She recognized it, but our medications can make us impaired, and we have to watch for that.
Yeah, that's pretty scary. And now sleep is another one where that is, we're all tired a lot of the time, and people, they have to get home, right? And right. You might be far away from home, you had a busy night, so sleep must be just as dangerous. Falling asleep behind the wheel or being tired behind the wheel, right? Must be just as dangerous as those other ones, right?
Absolutely. So, in my career in law enforcement, on the midnight shift or evening shifts or whatever, I used to see a vehicle that was all over the road, and I would say, ooh, here's a drunk driver. And I would stop them. No, they just got out of work. They did the midnight, the 4 to midnight, for example, and they're driving home now. They're tired, they're sleepy. But they had all the signs of somebody being an impaired driver under alcohol or drugs because of their driving, just all over the road. But they were dozing. And so our sleepy drivers, fatigue drivers, pose a huge risk. And this is another thing that AAA has done research on. And it's actually on the increase of amount of people that are driving tired and sleepy. But again, you nod off and you cross that center line, and you crash into another car coming the other way, pretty significant crash. And there are those out there, or running off the road and crashing into a tree. So pretty significant. So we urge, everybody, make sure you're getting good sleep. We ask that, if you're traveling down the road, going long distances, that every 2 hours you stop and get out, walk around, hydrate yourself with water, and then, get back in and do the same thing. Because if you're traveling from here to Florida, a lot of people try to push it a little bit. And so, but you need to make sure you're getting your sleep and you're doing the right stuff.
Yeah, listen to some music that kind of keeps you awake. I remember that is something I remember in driver's ed, is some of the techniques for, like, if you're feeling tired, and you need to get home, but it's like things like, chewing gum or listening to loud music. Don't put your, like, relaxing, sleepy time music on. Maybe don't, we love NPR, maybe don't put NPR on. Maybe don't put Concord TV on even. Play some, I don't know, do we like heavy metal? What do we like? Right? Something that's going to keep you focused and attentive and on the road.
So so all of those are short-lived, what you just said.
Yeah.
They are all very short-lived things. The body will revert back eventually.
No matter what tricks you try.
So we recommend that you've got to pull over the side of the road, stop, get a cat nap, or call somebody or whatever. But a lot of those techniques are very short-lived. They don't last too long. Especially interstate driving, you'll go right back into the sleepy mode again.
Right, you'll feel fine for 5 minutes, but your body's telling you it's just a reaction.
The body is going to overcome it. It's just going to say, I am exhausted, I am tired.
Yeah.
So,
well, Tom, we're in our last couple minutes here, but I know I did still want to talk about just the concept sharing the road and some of there's many different aspects of where we need to be mindful of, whether it's emergency vehicles. That's certainly something I know that you care quite a bit about. But just maybe tell us a little bit with right-of-way and sharing the road and some of those topics.
So yield signs, as we see those out there, some people that have a yield sign sometimes don't, and they come out in front of us or whatever. Or what does a yield sign mean to us? So I ask a lot of people at some of the classes that I give is, what color is a yield sign? And so for the senior population, a lot of them will say it's yellow and black, but it's not. It's red and white. And so I do say a caveat to them that 25 to 30 years ago, it was yellow and black, but the federal government changed it to the red and white. It's red outline. And the reason they did that is what does red mean?
Usually stop.
Stop, right. It gives us, and plus it stands out more. So when we see those yield signs, it may mean we do have to stop. But yield means that we hopefully can get into traffic without too much of a problem and at ease, but not all the time. So when we're traveling down the interstate, especially in on-ramps are a big thing. If I'm looking down the road and I see an on-ramp coming, I get myself into at least the middle lane. And that way it's going to allow that person just to kind of merge in. Sometimes it's not possible. So as we yield, we may have to slow up a little bit and readjust so that we can get in. And sometimes, heavy traffic can be a problem. But yielding, we got to pay attention to those signs. We have to stop if necessary, and then yield the right of way to the vehicles already on the road. So that's very important.
Yeah. So not just with other vehicles, so that's important, but also like pedestrians. I shared kind of my own little experience just last week. When I knew you were going to be coming in, I was like, I'll have to tell Tom about this. But pedestrians, being aware, sharing with pedestrians, because sometimes it's legitimate crosswalks. Sometimes there's people jaywalking or unexpected things that people on foot are doing, right?
Yep, that's right. And so if somebody's in a crosswalk, we are obligated by law to stop for them. So we need to do that. So basically that is yielding to them. They have the right of way in a marked crosswalk to cross. So we do need to watch for that. We do need to watch for, other potentially things that are happening. And I think we'll talk about it coming up here, is some other yields where we need to be, which would be secondly, slow down, move over. We're kind of yielding in that matter, and we want to provide the best safety feature we can for our police, fire, and ambulance, and construction workers on the side of the road. So we need to slow down or move over and yield. So basically give them that safety net that we possibly can.
And we see it right here.
So not always can we move over. If we can, that's the best. Sometimes we're just going to have to slow up, kind of nudge ourselves a little closer to that dotted line, or the solid line in the road, but not go over it. But if need be, we want to make sure that we provide a buffer for them so they can work safely on the side of the road. They're trying to save lives. We want them to do as best they can.
Well, it seems like you must have had personal experience that you do a traffic stop in an area where you're hoping when you open that door that people are giving you space with oncoming traffic. I'm sure you had incidents of where close calls, hopefully not, but
so luckily I was never hit, but yes, close calls, cars coming very close, almost sideswiping the side of my police car, and being out on the side of the road, coming way too close, where I can feel the wind rush is pretty significant. And sadly enough, we've seen, and as just recently, we've seen a lot of again, law enforcement officers' cars being hit, and then sadly we've had some law enforcement officers killed, firefighters out there, and ambulance people, tow truck operators, which something is, very concerning for AAA as well. We've had a number of our own tow truck operators killed or injured in these type of situations. So very significant.
And then we've made it this far into the show, and I don't think we've mentioned bicycles at all, which is pretty impressive. And here in Concord, we love having bicycles. There are areas that have bike lanes. We like that it's a community where you don't have to have a car to get around. But with that comes having to share the road with our friends on bicycles as well.
So with bicyclists, first of all, a bicyclist needs to follow the rules of the road. So they need to stay on the far right side of the road, but they have the right to use the road. And we got to remember, some of the roads on the sides are crumbly. And so they actually have the right to kind of come into the road a little bit so that they can safely maneuver on the sides of the roads. And New Hampshire has a law that you have to provide 3 feet safe distance. I think there's a slide for this, that it tells you that, this is the law, provide 3 feet. And it may mean that you have to slow up. and let the other car go by you and the other way, and then you go around the bicyclist. But bicycling has become very prevalent now. Yeah. People like the exercising. It gives you great mobility. You can get around quicker in a lot of places, especially in your more crowded areas and cities and so forth. So they're out there a lot, and we need to make sure we're doing the right things as drivers, allowing them the protection of distance, and then also for them making sure that they're doing and following the laws as well. Wearing protective clothing, because that's the other thing for both bicyclists and pedestrians, especially at night. Making sure bicycles have lights on them, rear lights and headlights and so forth. And if you're a pedestrian, making sure you have something with reflective clothing at night, and you're walking in the opposite direction of traffic.
Right.
I don't know how many times you've probably seen people walking on the side of the road and they got their backs turned to
right.
traffic.
Yeah, they're on the wrong.
They're on the wrong side, and that's so bad. And so, they can't see if a car drifts off of the side of the road. So we want to make sure we're doing our best thing, especially with bicyclists, and we're seeing a lot more, people that we share the road with. Cars are out there, trucks, buses, and so forth, but the roads are also made for bicycles and pedestrians crossing and so forth like that. We all have to share the road safely.
Well, we covered a lot in a short amount of time, Tom. This was a fun experience. Thanks for teaching us and reminding us things that hopefully we knew too, but some repetition is good as well. So before we wrap up, what's a key takeaway, or is there sort of a way you can possibly even summarize this whole concept of what we talked about today?
Yeah, driving is a serious thing that we kind of take for granted a little bit. All of us, put the key ignition in, or we hit the button to start our cars. And we take it for granted a little bit. We really do, about the seriousness of driving, because a lot of us drive every day. Nothing ever happens, and well, not that it couldn't happen, but we take it for granted.
For sure.
What we need to do is focus our driving. Driving is a serious thing that we need to take serious. And that's why, when we talk about your focus, what is your focus? Read the road, right speed, eyes up, anticipate, and then that donut is, that space, allowing space in front of you and around you and so forth. That's so very important. So as drivers, minimize our risk. How do we minimize those risks? We need to make sure we're paying attention, focusing, scanning, looking down the road, obeying the speed limits. All of that has got to be a full-time thing when we drive, and not looking at other things in our car, or having a real conversation that's becoming maybe heated or whatever with our passenger or something that's distracting us. It's because those are the things that are going to divert our attention to what's happening in front of us, and could have, a tragic result if we're not careful. So, seatbelts, just being prepared as drivers every day helps save lives.
Well, and this is such great information, and once again, I'd like to thank Tom for coming in, and for our audience, Tom Baran from AAA Northern New England. You're a great resource. Thanks for coming in. I'm just curious, do you teach classes for community groups? Can folks reach out to you if they want to learn about that possibility?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Thanks for that. I'd be happy to speak to any groups. I do presentations at conferences, seniors, citizen groups, teenagers, all of that, and new Americans learning, how to drive. Very happy to come and speak and talk about laws and how we can be safer drivers, and some techniques, that are helpful in our everyday driving. So call me at AAA Northern New England in Portland, Maine, is the best way to get a hold of me. I'm responsible for Maine, New Hampshire, and Vermont, so I do a lot of traveling myself. Believe me, as I'm hoping you can see, I have a great passion for traffic safety. Yeah. I've seen the tragedies. I've knocked on the doors. If I can do this and help save lives, this is what I want to do.